What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the Higher Purpose Podcast, episode 9. Today's going to be all about muscle building, and I'm joined alongside
Brandon Petta. How we doing, gang? We are super excited to talk about the topic of muscle growth and making gains and making your time in the gym all worth it.
Absolutely. So, I think we'll start with, there's, different stages to gaining muscle, and, really, you have kind of beginner, intermediate, and novice. So as a beginner, this is someone who's never really touched a weight before, new to weightlifting, advanced training. They can put on 20 to 30 pounds of muscle in 1 year, which is really astonishing. That's a huge amount of growth in 1 year. Following that year number 2, you're looking at about maybe 10 pounds, and then after that, you got like a pound a year. And then we'll talk about the stimuluses and the main factors to muscle growth, but that's really a realistic idea of how much muscle you can gain when you start the gym versus when you become more into that advanced stage.
Yeah, and so oftentimes, obviously beginner gains are huge and they're real, and people see these gains, like Chris said, the first 6 months, and they're killing it and they're having so much fun in the gym. But then that eventually, as you continue to be consistent with that, people will start to quote-unquote plateau,
Right.
And they'll get to that area plateau, and they don't know what they're doing wrong, or whether they should switch up a bunch of crazy variations or this and that. And I have, for example, guys, you got to think about it in a pyramid. I have a pyramid of muscle building, of the most important is at the bottom of the pyramid and less important rises to the top. So when you are at that plateau period, what happens is you've been consistent. That's the base of the pyramid, being consistent. And when I say consistent, that doesn't mean the frequency of 6-7 days in the week. Consistency means months, years at a time.
Right.
When you are consistent for those 3, 4, 5 months, year 1, 2, 3. That's what I'm saying consistently, and that can be between 3, 4, 5 days in the gym a week during that time, typically. Right. But after consistency, that's where intensity comes in, and intensity is going to be a major contributor. I'm saying number 2 overall in how to create that muscle. And a lot of times when people are plateauing, it's because they're not pushing the limit. They're not quote-unquote adding weight to the bar week over week. A lot of times that can happen because people aren't logging in a journal or on some type of app to remember what weight that they were using the week prior. So how are they going to make progress if they're not pushing the limit week after week? Another thing that comes with intensity. So intensity happens when intensity means working almost towards failure at the end of the set. So when you are pushing the weight up, let's say you're doing a bench press, and if you're watching on video, I'm acting out, pushing my arms up. You are trying to push as hard as you possibly can, but the tempo isn't there. It's not a quick tempo because the gravity from the weight is obviously pushing back.
Right.
So that press on that last rep towards failure, it's a very slow, fatiguing, you're pushing as hard as you can and doing everything in your power to get that last rep up. That is the intensity that we are talking about, that a lot of people don't push themselves to in order to gain that muscle once they've quote-unquote plateaued for months at a time or however long it may have been.
I also think it's interesting because intensity and this is RPE, rating of perceived exertion, but I always wonder what is your, what's your RP, your scale versus mine. I think it's so crazy to think about when it comes to pushing yourself, because usually, when we're benching, there is a point where you can't physically get the bar up, but you rarely see someone fail on a squat. When's the last time you couldn't get a squat up?
Yeah, see, I always think about, obviously you have to think about safety in mind as well, because you don't want to risk
that might have been coming from a crazy standpoint, but it's at some point your body or your mind tells your body hey, that was enough, that was all we had, but was it? So I think that's another curious. That's an interesting topic. That's kind of a song for another day, but
to answer your question though,
yeah.
The way I try to think about it for myself and with my clients is I do the scale from 0 to 10, 10 being like until failure. But so what that means is if it's an RPE of 9, that means we have 1 rep left in the
Right.
tank, and 10 is that failure. So depending on the program, by the end of it, we'll work our way up towards that 9, 10 RPE, but I always also let them know, like, when you're pushing the 10, you either need to have that spotter, depending on the lift or
Right.
whenever, and you just have to be conscientious of potentially hurting you don't want to hurt yourself or risk injury on yourself or potentially harm anyone else if it's just way too much weight and you can't back it up.
Yeah. No, for sure. And I'm gonna even take a step back here and say, like, go back to like the beginner phase and say, like, just lifting weights alone, like if you're someone who hasn't really been going to the gym, like, you're gonna see results almost regardless of how hard you're pushing yourself. It's like you were saying, it's when we break into those intermediate and advanced stages where intensity becomes one of those key factors on how we're gonna break through plateaus, how we're gonna make gains. And as someone who's been doing, especially strength training now for 5-6 years, I am like in that advanced, quote unquote, trained stage where I've been practicing things like the barbell squat, the barbell deadlift for 5 years. And you do hit plateaus, and sometimes these plateaus are very long, and they require completely changing up your programming, switching to different lifts, different accessory lifts. You do reach almost like a genetic limitation, and I don't want to like blame it on that, but like there are points where the intensity doesn't. You're putting all out, but like the return is there, and even things like deloads become like key for that, which is like giving your CNS a break.
But dude, you're absolutely right. But so this is actually an interesting thing is sometimes you have to, when you continue to just add weight to the bar week after week, right? There's obviously a point of time where you can't lift 1 million pounds, correct?
Right.
So at some point you actually have to realize also, are you trying to make strength gains or muscle gains specifically? Because the bar, adding weight to the bar is one way to increase muscle, but there's also other variables of
Right.
progressive overload that come when it's time under tension. That comes from metabolic stress,
Right.
volumes. And there's different ways to actually increase the size of your muscle that's not just adding weight to the bar, and those can be great ways. And this is all advanced. Like this is not the novice doesn't have to worry about this. But as an advanced lifter, when you've hit a plateau for a while, there's different things that you can play around with when it comes to your tempo, working on different eccentric and concentric contractions.
Pause reps are huge.
Exactly. Drop sets.
And as I mentioned, those are so then there's different. Going back to intensity here, these are called high intensity sets, but things like drop sets and rest pause. So a drop set would be like you're benching 135 till failure, and then you're dropping down to 115, hitting it again till failure, then maybe going to 95 and hitting it again till failure. That is like sending a stimulus to your body, which is one of those key things to grow and to change. There's things called rest pauses, so that might be doing 135 on a barbell bench till failure, re-racking the weight, giving it 10-15 seconds of recovery, and then hitting it again right till failure. This is like, I always say it's like kicking you when you're down.
Yeah.
Like you're down, get kicked again.
Yeah.
And these are all, from my research, I've gathered like high intensity, these techniques, not something that you should be doing on every movement, every set. It's more or less maybe 1, possibly 2 sets in a workout. You might do some type of drop setting or rest pausing. It really is, because it does that. There's a lot of stress on the body.
Yeah.
And physiologically, working out, weight training in itself does have hormonal releases. It is a stress on the body, which ultimately is what causes muscle growth. Because think about it. The reason that when you go to the gym and you work out, the reason that we build muscle is we're adapting to a certain environment or a stimulus. So in order to continue to see those adaptive changes, we need to continue to stimulate the body in new ways.
Absolutely.
And that even, that's just maybe your main movement on like a leg day is a barbell squat, but you want to change up your accessory movements, and that might lead to increases in your squat because you're changing up the variety of exercises outside of that main compound.
Absolutely. And another important thing that always comes up is how many reps do I do? How many reps do I do? So from as much research has been done about like rep schemes and this and that,
Right. I've heard so much like
it's generally considered in the fitness field that rep ranges between like 6 to 11, 6 to 12 is great for muscle gain specifically.
Right.
Reps from like 0 to 6 or around where most strength gains happen, and then like endurance, like your endurance is like 12 to 20 around there.
Right.
And so what happens is you want to make sure that the weights that you're using, if your goal is muscle gain, is that you're getting good work in and it's close to failure within that like 6 to 11, like somewhere within that range.
Right.
The thing about having like people always like bodybuilders use super high volume and very light weights. Well, so you have to think about it this way. There's only and this is again like a little bit more in depth, but there's only a certain amount of actually effective reps that stimulate muscle growth.
It's also different because they're usually on performance enhancers, so they can go higher. The higher volume is actually more beneficial.
But it's no 100%. But it's also but we're not me and Chris.
Most of our listeners are probably not using PEDs.
But the thing about with the higher volume too is so you have to do so many more reps at the lighter weight to hit that fatigue and that failure. So it's a much more efficient way to utilize your time if you're doing a little bit heavier in that 6 to 11.
I also think like if you're going for 20 reps. It's like the effectiveness of, like you said, those first 10 reps. Are you just blowing through them because it's lightweight? Also, I think that becomes more the mental game of what actually is failure, because usually you're at this point of burning, not actual muscle failure. And whether you're going to fight through the burn for 3 more or you're not. Mm-hmm. So I'm not a huge. I mean, I think personally when it comes to muscle like gaining, I like 6 to 8. Yeah. I think that it's very. I think 10 even becomes overwhelming. When you get under a barbell and it feels pretty heavy and you're going to say, I have to do 10, you might blow through the first floor just to know that you're within that kind of range of, I'm somewhat close to being done. Mm-hmm. So I've found, especially for myself and other athletes, going 6 to 8 reps and saying, I want you to concentrate on giving me your best 6 reps possible, putting your all into these 6 becomes much more beneficial and effective. And so I think as far as rep range, 6 to 12.
I'll do usually 10. The 10 to 12 is more like isolation work. So your bicep curls, your tricep kickbacks, those your like your nervous system, and you're just not as you don't need to recover as much from that. Compared to big compound
probably
movements.
Not doing sets of more for compounds on the 6 to 8. Bicep curls, I don't think I've ever done a set of 6 on.
Yeah, exactly.
Usually it's like 12.
Yeah,
10 to 12.
Yeah.
And then that being said too, I wanted to do some type of play off that. Now I can't remember.
I don't want to totally transition out for you, but I did want to. So the reason that I'm sure Chris stresses to his clients, I know I stress all the time to my clients about just getting the adequate protein intake too afterwards. And it's not as important for the complete novice, but especially when that intermediate advanced stages, like getting the adequate protein is going to be huge. We've said in previous podcasts, 1 gram per pound of body weight. So if you weigh 150 pounds and you have 150 grams of protein in that day. But it's so important because that is how you're going to rebuild and repair your muscles. So you got to be on top of that.
Absolutely.
You have to be on top of that.
And that's so like what we do in the gym is actually not making us stronger. It's making us weaker. We're tearing down muscle fibers. We're breaking them apart, which is allowing room for proteins to bind and rebuild, which becomes stronger. So the importance, especially as we become more and more trained, of rest, getting adequate sleep, adequate protein. This is huge keys to making muscle gains, to making strength gains, size gains, big time. Rest and recovery. Another thing I find curious, a lot of people don't even know this, but actually there's 2 portions of a movement. There's the concentric, which I'm gonna talk about. We'll talk about a bench press. The concentric part of the motion is pushing it up. and the eccentric is letting it come down. More muscle damage, which is going to lead to that growth, is done on the eccentric, meaning as the bar comes down, you'd be like, whoa, that's crazy. Like, it's when I'm pushing it up. But a lot of people I've found aren't aware that actually in every single movement, the eccentric, controlling the negative portion of the movement, is where we're doing more damage, which is going to allow for more room for growth and recovery outside of the gym. So that's another thing, and that ties into the intensity techniques of control negatives, and even pause reps, I think.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Huge.
So think about it. Let's say, for example, we have dumbbells that go up to 100 pounds here. If you're doing a goblet squat, to make that goblet squat 10 times harder, maybe instead of just like a regular tempo, you do a 5-second negative,
Right.
and tell me that 100-pound dumbbell doesn't feel like an absolute boulder by
ton
the
of
end
bricks,
of
yeah.
5 seconds controlled on the way down.
So I think another thing to talk about, and you might have a different opinion. Brandon and I, we're not what's it called? We're not necessarily, we don't always have the same opinion. So it's I think that so the stimulus, as we're saying, muscle building is a result of a stimulus, and then resting, recovering, and doing it again. I've always thought, and I've always preached, hitting muscle groups 2 times per week, which is an example of frequency. And the way that I've always thought about it is, rather than training my legs 52 times a year, if I train them once a week, now I'm getting 104 workouts in. And I've always noticed that, or I've learned that after you've hit a muscle group, let's say legs, protein synthesis goes up in the muscle group for about 48 to 72 hours after, which leaves them on day 3. So if you're doing a pull-push leg or one of the push-pull leg split, that by hitting them twice a week, you're allowing that protein synthesis to be spiked, and then when it returns to baseline, you're kind of hitting it again, almost always allowing for like growth and protein synthesis to be occurring.
And one thing, and it's funny because I actually do agree with you on that point. Okay. So it's not something that we disagree on. But I always like to think about muscle protein synthesis almost as like a game of cat and mouse. And the reason I say that is because it has to always be higher than muscle protein breakdown.
Right.
So that's when people are on steroids, when people are on the juice, they are always at an elevated point of muscle protein synthesis. So it's constantly elevated. They don't have to continue to rise and elevate it again like throughout the week by hitting the different stimuluses.
Right.
And that's the difference. That's why you see these people who aren't natty, who are absolutely ripped and jacked. That it's because that's what the juice does. That's what steroids does. It elevates muscle protein synthesis. So that shit is elevated like 24/7.
Yeah, no, and that's unnatural. That's not found in nature. So that's why. I mean, you see the people, influencers and stuff on TikTok, and we don't know what they do, but they are at a different type of advantage having those types of things in their system.
But to also go off what you said with the 2 times a week, I absolutely agree with that. But I think a lot of people get a huge misconception about how much volume you actually need within those 2 days. Like, you can hit 4 to 5 exercises if your intensity is freaking there, like, and you're working your ass off. Like, let's say you have 2 push days, or I like to do 1 push day and an upper day where I'll include chest in both. As long as your intensity is there, you can do 4 to 5 exercises and fucking go balls to the walls, working your ass off there. And you're gonna see growth. You're gonna stimulate a lot of muscle growth. You don't need. Some people think you need like 8, 9 exercises like on all these days,
like
and they're just.
You need the fly from underneath, the fly from.
You need decline, incline, and flat bench press.
Yeah.
You don't need all of that. It's too much.
I always say it's like kicking a dead horse.
Exactly.
And I think. I always look at the muscles as gas tanks too. So like you come into a workout with a certain amount of fuel in you, and honestly, by the time you're done with your second compound in maybe your chest, you've probably almost run your gas tanks dry. So at that point, by doing infinite sets of flies, you're really just kicking a dead horse.
Exactly.
And you could be spending your time making sure that those first couple compounds you're putting more effort and attention into, rather than just wasting fuel because you have 7 more movements to get through. So that was going to be something I wanted to talk about too, was prioritizing compound movements. And a lot of times it's not fancy machines. It's not really that pretty. It's old school. It's textbook. But your dumbbell presses, your overhead barbell presses, your overhead dumbbell presses, so your squats, deadlifts, barbell rows, dumbbell rows, these heavy quote unquote compound movements, they're the bread and butter. That it's like that's where the money's made. I see a lot of people trying to reinvent the wheel with silly kind of cable variations and whatnot. And not to say that they're not beneficial, but I think that sticking to your guns, sticking to these heavy compound movements are the best way to grow and build muscle. And not only that, like prioritizing them as the most important movements in your workout. So if it's a leg day, you want to prioritize your barbell squat and your barbell RDL because you're going to see, or dumbbell RDL, you're going to see the most return from these.
Mm-hmm. And especially that we've spoke about before. So when you're doing the compound movements, I always like to do them earlier on. You like to do them earlier on in the session because first off, you want to have enough energy in order to give it your all during those. But what actually happens also is you activate your central nervous system when you're doing those compound lifts, and when your central nervous system is activated, the rest of your lifts you're going to be able to recruit more muscle fibers during them.
Right.
So it's like, by hitting those like heavy compound lifts to start, you're actually also helping your later on lifts that are more for like that specific hypertrophy.
Absolutely.
Like 8 to 10 reps range.
And I really think because there's nothing fancy about what we're saying either. If you guys notice, it's very like cut and dry. There's no secret to building muscle. It's been around for a very long time. So, and I think like that's where we get kind of caught up in all these different variations and crazy workouts that we see. But at the end of the day, it's very, execute certain exercises to provide a stimulus, rest and recover properly. And that's really the keys to building muscle, I think.
I want to talk a little bit more about the time, too, when the time is right to build muscle. For example, a lot of people will come in, like consultations or something, or a lot of misconceptions. Like, people are like, I want to build muscle and I want to get a six-pack. Well, the thing is, like, these are you're going to have to go in two opposite directions in order to do that. And what I mean by that is if you want the six-pack, you're going to have to be in a calorie deficit when it comes nutrition-wise. When it comes to building muscle, you are able to, it is possible to be in a slight calorie deficit or at maintenance in order to increase your muscle, but it's not nearly as efficient as being in a caloric surplus.
Right.
So my suggestion to everyone is that the time to build muscle is when you can get lean enough. Ideally, it's like 10% body fat. This is very specific. Like, not everyone has to follow this, but being leaner, just take this overall. Being leaner is a better place to start bulking rather than just like trying to throw on muscle as you're already big, because the truth of the matter is once you're past 15% body fat, your body actually accumulates fat at a much higher rate, not to mention a little bit more in-depth nutrient partitioning that happens when you are much leaner. I don't know.
And I mean, yeah, I've felt it. I've seen it firsthand. Yeah. When you're in a super lean state, the body really knows how to process all the nutrients coming in, knows to send the protein for recovery. It's really good at saying, hey, you got to do this, you got to do that, you got to do this. As you put on weight, it's not as good. You're not as insulin sensitive. And I will say, like, the best gains I've ever seen, I think, coming out of my last competition, I was measured at like 3% body fat, and came out of that bulk in about 6 months and took my squat, bench, and deadlift numbers nearly 100 pounds higher on all three of them than I've ever seen.
That's amazing.
So in about a 6-month time frame, I was able to put on 40 pounds, still have like pretty good abs, and like was stronger than I'd ever been. So yeah, starting leaner when it comes to bulking is certainly better. If you're someone new to the gym, the stimulus alone of just playing with weights is gonna allow your body to build muscle. So it is possible to recomp, quote unquote, which means we're gonna burn fat and build a little muscle at the same time, by being around that maintenance, maybe slightly under. Especially if you're a beginner, the more trained that you get, someone like me, I basically have to wake up in the morning and have a goal in mind, whether it's I want to get stronger, but and increase my calories and gain weight, or I'm gonna take that hit, possibly even get a little bit weaker and lose the body fat and have a different type of aesthetic. So, it is possible, but it's not likely. These are called catabolic and anabolic states, but in order to build muscle, we need to be in an anabolic state, and that comes with food. Insulin is a huge. This is a fun fact. Insulin is the most anabolic hormone in your body. It's more anabolic than testosterone. I don't know if you know that.
I know. I don't think I did.
So when you're bulking and you're eating 8 meals a day and high carbs and insulin's pumping, that does lead to other things like, yeah. But anyways, insulin is very anabolic, and when that's circulating at high frequencies and with protein in conjunction, it is telling your body to grow, to build. Unfortunately, you're also growing and building your fat stores. So it is a double-edged sword, but it is possible, especially in that beginner time frame.
And the time to end the bulk, honestly, the time
to end is when you don't feel like you look good anymore.
That's kind of it, bro. Like when you're looking in the mirror and you're just like, all right, like I'm a little more thick than I'm comfortable with. Like
you don't want to check yourself out in the mirror. That's when you know you're.
Yeah, when you can't look at yourself in the mirror and you're just like, Jesus, like you're trying to like see. There's no definition.
Let me put on this black T-shirt so I look really big, and that'll remind me why I'm bulking.
Yo, black T-shirt, bro.
No, I'm saying like a black short sleeve shirt that makes you look all big and brolic, but your guts hanging out just as far as your biceps.
Yeah, that's pretty much usually the time to quit it, and then time to go back on the cut.
Right, and it's at the end of the day, it's all about goals. I mean, I tell everyone too, like, the best. I would consider myself pretty strong. I feel like I'm a strong guy. I've been really training hard, a lot of high intensity interval techniques or high intensity techniques for a very long time, and my best bench is 315, squat best was 405, and deadlift 545, which, if you think about it, for years and years and years and years and years of training them, you'd think it'd be higher, but it does like reach this kind of standstill point where like either the only way I'm gonna really get those numbers up more is to like really bulk hard,
Sure.
or so determining your goals, like if you want to be a strong man, then like be a strong man and just know that you're not gonna look maybe the way that other people look, or you want to be in the middle. But I think like at the end of the day, just like anything else, we always preach like having a goal, having something that keeps you kind of going, and keeping it fun. Like maybe you like 15 to 20 reps, and if that gets your ASS to the gym, then sorry, now I'm swearing. Then do it. It's like at the end of the day, we are people of health. We promote health, and like and muscle building is really fun, but it's not for everyone. So
yeah, no, absolutely
keeping
not.
goals in mind, and another thing I will touch on too. Supplements. I'm not like the biggest fan of supplements. I spent a lot of time in college researching them down to the ingredients, pre-workouts, proteins, everything, HMB.
And working at GNC.
Like I know supplements like the back of my hand. And I will say, if there is one supplement and you're trying to build muscle, I do recommend that you take 5 grams of creatine monohydrate daily. I think that is a very highly effective. It's been proven time and time again.
It's the most studied supplement of all time.
Most studied supplement. It is not unsafe. There's plenty of studies that support its efficacy, its safety for long-term use, 20, 30 years. And I think if you're in the gym and like you're trying to like achieve, even if you're trying to cut, stay on creatine. Every bodybuilding show I've ever done, I've taken creatine the entire time. It doesn't make you quote unquote gain any. It has nothing to do with fat stores. Yes, water weight is fine. Especially if you're lean and you're on creatine, all that water is being stored in your muscle cells. There's no fat cells to store that water in. So it is great for power, explosiveness.
One thing about creatine too, that it's just a common misconception is a lot of people think when they take the creatine that they're just going to get bigger and stronger. The creatine works by helping you with your lifts. Like you're able to lift more because of the water that's in your muscle.
And muscle strength is in direct correlation with muscle size and that's why we aim to increase strength and aim to increase our progressive overload and go up 5 pounds a week or 10 pounds a week on a lift, because that increased strength leads to increased muscle size. They work hand in hand. And another thing to like think about too is like, this is a very long-term game. So if you're looking to like look like the guy on the cover of Men's Fitness, know that that man's been working hard for probably 10 years to achieve that physique.
100%.
So like if you're in this for a quick fix for a, oh, I'm going to go to GNC and I'm going to buy the magic pill for $170 and take it for 4 weeks. I'm going to look like, The Rock. Like, no,
Yeah.
The Rock's been working his ass off for 20 years.
Yeah,
all right?
exactly.
So don't think that that's not how this works. You got to be in this for the long run. You have to be programmed, calculated. And at the end of the day, stick to those compound lifts. 6 to 8 reps on those compounds. Maybe 10 to 12 on your isolation movements. You don't need to overload with a bunch of fancy TikTok movements. We can stick to these things that we know work. Getting our protein in, resting, recovering, and going back all the way to the first thing Brandon said, consistency, not in the form of 3 or 5 days this week, but consistency over the next 5 months, over the next year, 2, 3, 5 years. That's what's going to get you to where you want to be. That's what's going to build muscle.
Exactly. And if that consistency means that you got to throw in some wild cards in your training to just keep it fun and keep it light, like do whatever you have to do to just make sure you're consistent. That is the most important thing.
Listen, if you've been training for 5 years and you tell me you want to do a month of CrossFit style workouts, what is a month compared to those 5 years? If that's what's going to make you happy, if that's what's going to keep you interested, then do it. Because at the end of the day, that's what it's all about. Constantly stimulating our bodies and using new techniques. Like, I have no problem. We just got the safety squat bar here, and it's like, I wanted to try it out. I changed it up yesterday. Conventional deadlifts versus hex bar, leg pressing versus hack squat. Like, keeping it fun. That, like, at this point for me, that's what keeps it fun. Changing up the styles, getting a little bit of variety.
And one more, and just the last thing, because for me, this is kind of a big thing. So over the years, like, I was doing the same routine forever, and although obviously, like, as time has passed and I've learned a lot more about muscle growth and this and that, maybe what I know now has taught me that I wasn't being optimal in the gym back then. But my point is, it's never, let's say you've been to the gym for years and maybe you weren't doing the things that me and Chris are suggesting. Maybe you never had protein powder in your life. You haven't checked your protein, your calories, whatever. It's never been a waste to come to the gym.
No.
Do you know what I'm saying? Like, maybe you haven't been as optimal with gaining muscle, but just the psychology and just how good for your mental health and everything it is to just show up, get the workout. The rest of your day was affected by the tone you set in here. And like we spoke about before, there's so much more than just the muscle growth itself. So we're continuing to learn and this and that, but that doesn't, just because like myself, I wasn't doing things right for years, means by any means that was wasted time, because those 4, 5, 6 years of doing like a similar, let's say, routine or something, like, that set in stone. Obviously, it was great for my mentals for the point in time I was doing it, but that created habits that now, as you continue to learn more and more, that the gym is part of my, like, identity, fitness is part of my identity. So those times going, just because maybe it wasn't optimal muscle wise, they were never wasted.
Right.
That's
never.
just one.
It's never a waste. And movement is medicine.
Yeah.
To this day.
Exactly.
I can't tell you how many rough days and just getting up and going for a walk and you're like, oh, I feel better.
Exactly.
Movement is medicine, and there is no time wasted. There's no such thing as a bad workout.
Yeah.
So
I like that, man. Major takeaways, or
major takeaways from today: consistency, long term benefits, years, not days, years, months, years. 6 to 8 reps on the compound, sticking to the compounds. I think stick to the compound. 6 to 8 isolation, maybe 10 to 12. Creatine is good, protein is good, and rest and recovery. And it's all about stimulus, intensity, push it, and this is not my A+ wrap-up game, but those are some good key takeaways, so use them. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us, Legacy Fitness Club, or on Instagram, you can find Chris Wertman, Brandon Petta. We will be here for you. We got you.
Hell yeah.
Anything you need, let us know. and we will catch you on the flip side.
Peace.